Well, hey, sorry if I'm totally messing up this class right now, you guys. I cannot get my camera to come on. So did I just cancel the class and then it restarted, or are you okay? Yeah. Sorry, Matt.
That's okay.
I super apologize.
That's okay.
I'm like in a different room with a different computer and my laptop is broken. So, all right, continue on. I'm sorry.
Okay. And if at any point anyone has any questions or you want any further information on anything, please let me know. Cool. So now, so those are just several collections that I have found are work well. One other kind of comment about the bassoon repertoire is it is reasonably small. I also am an organist and a church music director, and the organ has maybe the largest repertoire of music with new stuff coming out constantly. And the bassoon, you have to really kind of search just to expand it ever so slightly. So there's a pretty specific of pieces that are often played, and there certainly is other stuff out there, but it's not you have to search for it quite well. So in the after I if I have a student who's gone through some of those sort of books, I also personally spend a lot of time with them on methods books. Once we start getting to them wanting to do some more in-depth solo playing, I have a few different categories that I've found useful. So, and this is where now it depends on each individual student. So, some of the issues that vary greatly from what I've seen, even when bassoon players are starting college, or any. It's been a while since I've had any high school students, but in that time frame too, there's the range of what they are capable of varies greatly. The quality of the reeds they are playing can sometimes very much affect what they are able to play or not. If they are able yet to read tenor clef, that is a significant hurdle that when I have a student coming in college, generally it's about 50-50 of them are either super comfortable with tenor clef or absolutely dislike it very much, and that sometimes is a struggle to try to get them excited about tenor clef, because a lot of music, once you get past this level, will have tenor clef in it in some way. And then with their technique capabilities is always a factor too. So one category, if their technique is starting is to become more comfortable for them, and we want to work a little bit more on that. There's a couple of Baroque pieces that work very well. There are no tenor clef in this in either of these two. So one of them is a sonata by Marcello, and it is originally for cello, but the Leonard Sharrow, the same guy who did that one of the books I mentioned, he did an arrangement specifically for bassoon. So it works nicely in starting to really kind of build some of the technique and fast playing and articulation and all that. One other one is by Telemann, a sonata. This was for bassoon or recorder originally. So this is one of the unique Baroque pieces that was originally actually written for bassoon. Vivaldi wrote 37 concertos for the bassoon as well, but those tend to be quite a bit more difficult. So that's more of a later kind of time frame. So that's within that category would be those two Baroque pieces. And then if your student is willing and ready to begin tenor clef, if they're not already happening to do so, this will happen in with methods books. We'll eventually get to the tenor clef kind of introducing it, but two kind of real world pieces that are have just a little bit of tenor clef to just kind of give them the taste of what tenor clef is like in real life. There's one called Concert Piece for bassoon and strings originally, but there's a piano version. This is by Burl Phillips. And this sometimes bass clarinetists will play this piece as well, and it works very well on the contrabassoon if you happen to ever have have the budget for a contrabassoon in your school. But the other one is Paul Hindemith. He wrote a bassoon sonata, and that is a couple movements long. And the second movement starts in tenor clef, and they're mostly slow. Both of these, the tenor clef is a slow part of the piece, so it gives them a good chance to deal with that. And I can't tell you how many times I've come across these anything with tenor clef where you see the note names written above hand, which it works. But I always try to get them to really kind of get in on it. Once they're used to it, it's just like anything, it becomes second nature. But that's always a hurdle to get over. So depending on the student, is when you would decide to go to any of that. Another category is French music, and so there's a lot of bassoon music written by the French, and the thing to note, which you may already all be aware of, is there are two, like the clarinet. There are, same as the clarinet, there's a German system and a French system of bassoon. In the clarinet, the French system has reigned supreme, but in the bassoon world, the German system is the one that is commonly used here and most everywhere except for France. So in a lot of French music, there will be a lot more high notes, very high notes, in the range because the French system, that's a little bit easier to play. So typically in the band music I've experienced through high school age students, it goes up to a G, the G above middle C, or maybe a little bit higher than that. In my first book, I even pulled that out today. My essential elements or a standard of excellence. There it is. That just gives up to the G. So most of this music now at this point will start to creep up to the C above that. In the really hard French music, where the high notes, it'll go up to the E above that, and even sometimes the F. So that's where that usually isn't touched till even later in college. Playing up to a C or C sharp or D typically is not that difficult once you learn the fingerings, as long as you have a reed that's capable of it. Above that, you sometimes need a special vocal or a special something, or make a special reed in order to get those notes to speak nicely and regularly. But so there's two French pieces that don't go quite that high. I think they go up to about a C or maybe a D. So this is where that range, upper range, is starting to expand a little bit. One is called the Premier Solo by Eugene Bordeaux. And I like to introduce this one, especially if we're trying to work on phrasing or tone production. It starts off with a nice slow kind of operatic feeling to it, and then it does have a technical ending that does that. So that's a nice time when I like to introduce this if we're trying to work on that aspect of playing. The other one is by Gabriel Pierney, Solo de Concert. This one I actually played some of in I think my senior year or so of high school. So this was my first introduction to French bassoon music. After that, there's a bunch of lots of pieces, because there was the annual bassoon kind of woodwind competition of pieces they wrote for in France. So every year for a good long time, there was a new French bassoon piece. But they start to get very difficult as we go along with that. And then the other category is the big classical concertos, and almost every so there's the granddaddy of them all is the Mozart bassoon concerto. This is what on every orchestral audition you have to play, and it's no matter what, you deal with the Mozart at some point in time, and it's a great piece of music. So that's a good thing. But there's also Weber wrote a bassoon concerto, and this one I would say almost every student I have had in recent years, this was like their big senior year of high school piece that they played. I played it around that same time too. So it's a little bit aspects of it are a little bit easier than the Mozart concerto, but it's not. It's not super easy to say that, of course, but there's just a few of the technical difficulties are a little less technically difficult in this. piece. So this one I come across very frequently with people who have played it, and they always love it. And then the Mozart is one that I was introduced to also in high school. This one I always like to start backwards and work forward. So the third movement of this concerto is quite a bit more accessible than the first. The first movement's the toughest one. So I will often, if I have a student ready for this type of thing, we'll have them start with the third movement on this, and then the second movement is great too if we're trying to develop sound quality and still with phrasing and tone and all of that sort of thing. The range of these doesn't go quite as high as the French stuff. The Weber does get up to a high, a brief moment of a high C or D in there, but if your student can't quite get there yet, that can always come down the octave if needed. So those are kind of the basics of those basic categories that I like to then take in which to lead students depending on what they're ready for and what they are interested in at that point in time. So, any questions? Just
Do you have any recommendations for websites to direct us, maybe, or for us to be able to direct our students to find rep for any age group?
There are. I did a quick look at this actually yesterday, and it varies a lot. So there were two main ones that I took a look at that were easy to find. So if you Googled standard bassoon repertoire, these are the first few things you will find as well. One of them is a bit more in depth. It is, I have it here somewhere. I believe it was bassoondoctor.blogspot.com or something like that. And that listed 4 grade levels of music. Part of it, some of these are all pieces that are very standard. A lot of what was in level 3 is what I would say most college age students play in that particular list. In level 2 and 1, there was not a whole lot in level 2 that I was all that familiar with personally, and in level 1 were some of what I mentioned was there. So that was the better of the lists. The other one that I found easily was IHSA, Illinois High School, whatever they are, and there it is. Thank you. Yes, I believe so. If that was the first thing that came up on the Google search, that would be it. So that's the one that has the level 1 and 3 are level 4 in that list is pretty much what unless you're a professional soloist, level 4 stuff in there is. I have not tackled almost any of that because some of it I have, but I've had no need to. So it's all good music. Don't get me wrong. Yes, and then the other one was through IHSA, and that had that was. It looks nice because it says this is good for a middle school age. This is good for this, and all of that is true. About half of that I've never heard of. That was on that list, and you can find it. But some of what was in there are primarily in some of these books that I mentioned as well. So that's a starting point, but there's no perfect list that I have found online. Any other questions?
It's not related to rep, but I'm curious about just good places to find bassoon reads or recommendations for, because I know that's such a huge part of, being successful. And if they don't have a private teacher, where can we get good reads?
This too, sadly, there's no perfect answer, unfortunately. But in my so in the students I've been working with in recent years. They have their what they have found works for them, which is great. Before that, I would suggest that um, having well, one company, it's Miller Marketing Company. It's based, I think, in Pennsylvania, and they have a lot of that's kind of the main go-to bassoon equipment supplier that exists nowadays. They have a range of types of reeds. So Donzi is one brand that I have used before I was making my own reeds, which are great. They're a little bit more. I don't know where you're finding reeds and what they cost, but those were, at least when I was buying them, on the higher end of price. But they have an in-house brand now too. I think 2X Reed or something like that makes reeds. And knowing the company, I would trust that those would probably be pretty good. I think it's millermarketingco.com, unless they've changed it. Something like that, yeah. So that's a good place that I always that's where I buy my cane and anything that I'm any supplies I need. They now have, which you may be aware of, plastic reeds. This is by Legere, who've been making clarinet and I think saxophone reeds too for in the plastic world. It's not quite there yet. They certainly work. I bought one years ago just to see what it's about, and I have used it once or twice, but so I mean it gets a nice sound. These are very expensive, 150 to $200, somewhere in that range, but they will last a very, very, very long time. So if you have a very serious student and they really, that would be my second choice. I would try to find a good cane reed first. There's a lot you can do with that musically and with tone color. And articulations tend to be a little bit better on this. Through the microphone, you may not hear much of a difference, but yeah. So that's my main suggestion. One student I have found someone on Etsy who makes reeds and sells them and likes them, and they sound good for her. So I don't know exactly where she came across it. I think it's Billy Bassoon something. I've not researched that, but they work well for her. So that would be one of the suggestions I would make. I see recommendations for brands of bassoons. Fox is the kind of the go-to. They're based in Indiana. Their student models are in the 5,000 to 7,000 ish range. They have plastic bassoons that are a bit cheaper. When I was in high school, we got a big grant from the city. I don't remember where, and part of what they bought, they were able to buy all new instruments for the program, and they did get 2 Fox bassoons, which were an extreme, much better than what had been there prior to that. So that's one model. The other brand that is kind of in that same category that has a good reputation is Mooseman. And actually that Miller Marketing that I mentioned, I think they're the main people that sell those. So those would be the ones that would compare closest. And from again, high school students I have seen either who have come in to audition with a school instrument or with their own instrument. Those levels of Fox or Moosemans have been the primary instruments that are good for school programs. Absolutely.
There was a cool question about seating that I think Alex put up there. Like, as a bassoonist, do you have a place in a band where you kind of like to be seated, or have you played in bands where you've been seated in places where you didn't really like it? Like who are the voices you typically like to be
Okay.
around in a wind ensemble?
That is a very interesting question. So, what I've it's been a while since I played in a band, uh, but from what I recall, um, in college at IU, I was lucky enough to play with Ray Kramer a couple times in the wind ensemble there, and the seating they had there I liked. It worked well. We were next to the bass clarinets. Um, and behind the oboes, and I believe maybe saxophones were behind us. But that was one area that there was we could hear well, and oftentimes you'll get a lot of, from what I recall at least, there'll be lines doubled with the bass clarinets or with the tenor saxes and such, or the bari saxes a bit. So having that nearby was helpful. In high school, we were in the middle, and at that time, I didn't know any better as to to whether that was great or not. But it was similar in that we were near the bass clarinets and saxophones behind us. So there was a lot of when that meaty sound would always come through. We were all in it together there.
How about generally speaking here, what are some things that we can do as band directors where we're balancing so many different techniques and ideas between instrument families and things, but what are some things that we can help our students tone wise on the bassoon, and are there any things that you've come across as a lesson teacher where you're like, man, whoever told you this, could have saved us a lot of trouble by doing maybe certain fingerings differently? Like, for instance, like on the flute, there's a lot of band directors who never teach thumb B flat, and then you get into high school lit or advanced literature where you got a private lesson teacher saying, how are you never taught thumb B flat? This is like a basic fingering and it helps you out so much. So not only tone, but maybe some stuff you've come across as a private lesson teacher where you're thinking, these things should be taught right away.
Sure. So one thing related to tone, especially, I've found is the embouchure. And there are several schools of thought in what the best bassoon embouchure is. And I am not going to say there is one right or wrong way, but there's the way that I prefer, which is to, as you're some will talk about like an overbite, and kind of having the tongue or the bottom lips over the teeth, and you're almost biting down on the reed. And I think of it more like a whistle. So if you're going to whistle, the sides of your lips come in a little bit, and then you're just having a nice, even, round, fully encapsulated reed with even pressure from all sides. So a lot of times I'll see high school students or younger just biting down on the reed, and that is just going to make the sound thin and not very pleasant. And also usually much sharper than it needs to be, even if with that. So that's one thing I always start with. It's like a whistle. So if you're just thinking of a whistle and that nice round form the lips make, tends to be a good starting point for that. One other demonstration I like to do is to have, if I have a little bag with an elastic end on it, and if you were to pull it and it just starts to cinch around in a nice even manner, is a good way I like to think of it. So that's usually the first thing I'll find. Again, some teachers and professionals play with a little bit of a tighter embouchure, but I've found in some books that I've read, if it even suggests that the younger students, if they're reading that, they will take it very seriously, and that's where trouble happens. So that's one thing in terms of tone production. With reeds, there's a couple things that are relatively easy to fix that sometimes are a problem. So with your typical bassoon reed, you will have 3 wires on it. I don't know if you'll be able to see that. There's 2 that you can see. The third one is underneath that wrapping. Usually that will be thread. In this case, this is just a shrink wrap because it saves me time, and it works just as well. The main purpose of that is it gives you something to grab onto to put it on the instrument, or if it drops, it'll be bottom heavy as opposed to cracking the tip of the reed. So these wires, the 2 that you can see, sometimes when I think mostly we're Midwestern locations here, so we all know the differences in humidity and what they do to all of what we have. So if it's in the depths of winter as the wood is drying out, sometimes the wires will become so loose they'll just go straight down. So if you ever have that problem, just you have to be careful if you don't have all the exact tools, but you can just take a pair of pliers, and it's typically just a matter of pulling up the one part of the metal and just twisting it, tightening it a little bit, and then that will magically make the reed work again, whereas sometimes it otherwise wouldn't. So I mean, you can soak it to death in the winter, and that might help it too. But that's one thing that I have found a lot of times. I'm amazed they can get a sound out when the wires are just completely loose. Same thing in the summertime. If they get too tight, it will just shut off the sound, and so that's a problem too. You can loosen it just by twisting the other way. Depending on who made the reed, it is how you'll twist right or left. So a little experimentation with that. They're reasonably resilient things, the reeds. So if a student has a problem like that, I wouldn't be afraid to just try see what a little tightening of that would do. One fingering thing, and this relates to reeds as well. So your E and E flat. So these are in the second octave of the instrument. If the reed is too light and not heavy, hard, that E will drop. And so if especially if forcing it to, so my reeds, if I push hard enough, that note will drop. And so if that's a problem, there is this fingering, of just a reminder from your techniques classes days, is just the whisper key in the first finger, and in order to help that to stay stable, you can add the third finger of the right hand, and then you might still be able to knock it down. But otherwise, it will be a much more stable note in that case. The E flat, the half step right below that, is almost always a horrible note on the bassoon, sadly, and that will tend to fall down and go a little bit flat. So what you can do with that, and this is in some newer fingering charts, this is actually listed as the fingering. Oftentimes it will just be the left hand 1, 3 and whisper key, and if you add the thumb B flat and the first finger in the right hand, that gives it perfect stability. And depending on the instrument, you might do the thumb B flat, and instead of the first finger, you do the second finger. So those are just 2 fingerings that often, and especially the E flat, in some books it will just give the basic fingering, and then the right hand adding to that will really help to stabilize it very much. So yeah, those are just a couple things that I often find people are unaware of, and I'm surprised at how they're able to still make a sound with some of those issues.
Yeah, I was making the point in the chat there that we like to play, Matt, I don't know if you're aware of the F Remington exercise, where you go from F to E, F, E flat, F,
Okay.
D, pivot, right? And like I've had a lot of my bassoon players take lessons, and I usually don't have to tell them a whole lot about some of those alternates, but for those kids that don't take lessons and you don't necessarily give them a whole lot to work with, I know that exercise can be a complete disaster tuning wise.
Yes.
And, there's other instruments that struggle also with that. So it's a good exercise in that regard, but they have to know how to put down a couple extra fingerings for those notes.
Right. Yeah, especially and reeds played such a big part in that too, depending on what quality of reed they're playing on, that can make those notes passable or very much not.
Well, cool. Does anybody have any other questions for Matt before we kind of switch over to oboe? Excellent. Okay, well, Matt, we appreciate your time. And I know that if anybody else is on campus or doing some things, it'd be kind of fun to connect with you at some point, but we really appreciate you being a part of this. And yeah, let Matt know if you have any questions, folks. And you're M. Hogan at Vandercook, right?
Yes, correct.
So you can reach Matt there. And I think his email address is on the website, of course. So yeah, thanks so much for your ideas on repertoire and some of these questions you got to answer for us. And so Matt, we won't be offended if you go sign off and
Okay.
go take a walk or something as we switch over to Deb. And Deb, thanks so much for joining us and spending the next 45 minutes or so with us on oboe. Everyone, I did put an oboe handout that Deb shared with me. It's like a PDF. I threw that in the week 8 folder just a few minutes ago. So if you wanted to kind of follow along with some things that she is presenting here, that'd be great. But yeah, so Deb, I thought it'd be kind of fun for you to meet everybody and just have them tell you like where they all teach, a little bit about the levels they're teaching at, and then you can kind of introduce yourself and kind of go from there. So just another little intro from all of you, if you don't mind. Angela, you want to start us off?
Sure. So I'm Angela. Right now I'm teaching 7th grade band in Wakanda, Illinois. I have 2 oboe players, so really
Nice.
looking forward to this.
Nice. Good.
And Andre?
There we go. Okay. Hello, I'm from Ravenna, Ohio, teaching middle school, 8th grade and 7th grade choir and general music, and also 1st and 2nd grade as well. Aside from that, I do assist with the marching band, and I also teach a pep band at the college level.
Awesome.
How about Alex?
Hi, Deb. I'm Alex. I am a high school band director up in Northbrook, Illinois.
Great. Hi.
And Evan?
Hello, I teach high school and middle school band in Parma, Ohio.
Wow. Great.
Right, and Brian?
Hi, Deb. Thanks for being with us today. I teach middle school and high school band in Kalamazoo, Michigan area.
Great.
And Kristen?
Hi, I'm in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and I teach 6th grade and 8th grade band.
Wonderful. Great. Well, it's so great to meet all of you. In my head, I thought you'd all have oboe in your hand. So I'll rethink a little bit about how I was going to do this. There you go. I just thought I'd give you a little background about me to start with now that I've heard a little bit about you. Last season would have been my 37th year of playing oboe professionally full time. So hopefully this 38th year will actually work with a couple more gigs than last year. I play orchestras. I have an oboe and string quartet. I also contract musicians for concerts. I do lots of Broadway shows, anything that comes my way. I decided very early on I didn't want to be in a full-time orchestra because I love doing lots of different things and haven't regretted that ever. I teach at 3 colleges, and I also teach high school students privately. I'm rare in that I didn't start oboe until the 11th grade and got very lucky to then go to 4 colleges and get 2 master's degrees for whatever reason in oboe performance, and never had to have a day job. So life's been pretty lucky for me as far as the oboe is concerned. So I see you're all on silent, and I know that's the way things go, but don't feel shy at all about taking it off silent and just talking right over me and asking me questions, because I certainly don't want to hear me talk for 45 minutes straight. But more important than that, if you have a question, I don't want you to have to wait and think about it. I'd love for you to just jump right in so that I hit what's important to you guys, because that's what this is all about. Okay, so please feel free to jump right in anytime. So when I teach class like this live, I always like to change the title of this class to Taking the Fear Out of the Oboe. It's very interesting to me because frequently when I tell people what I do for a living, even if they don't know what the oboe looks like, even if they don't know what the oboe sounds like, they always say to me, "Oh, isn't that the really hard one?" And it's kind of just ingrained in the human psyche, I think, that this is the hard one. And whereas I'd love to be like, "Oh yeah, it's so hard," but honestly, flute was the hard one for me. I tried for years and years and couldn't. Uh-oh, what did I just do? I'm sorry. There we go. I bumped my computer and you guys disappeared. I tried flute for years and still can't get a sound out of it. To me, that's the really hard instrument. Reeds are hard, oboes are finicky. I think when you find the right instrument, it's not the hard one anymore. And in fact, a lot of times in my teaching, when students are working on something and they finally get it, if I just say to them, "Now make it easy," you watch their whole demeanor change, you watch the way they play it, and suddenly it sounds easy. And in fact, in my head, that is the biggest compliment as a musician I can ever get, is when an audience member comes up to me and says, "You made that look so easy." Whenever you see somebody great in sports or music or speech giving or whatever, we always walk away being impressed because it was easy for them, right? So that's the goal. Okay? So who should play the oboe? This is an interesting question. I remember when my child was going to 5th grade, the band director sent home a letter that said, "The kids can play any instrument that they want to play, but if your child wants to play the oboe, they have to have a parent-teacher conference." Well, I'm going to tell you right now, no kids are going to play the oboe because no kid is willingly going to sign up for a parent-teacher conference, right? But I kind of get it, because the oboe is one instrument where we really do need private lessons very early on, mostly because of the reed situation. And it's the one instrument where parents are going to have to spend a whole lot of money every month. Professional oboes think if they get 6 hours of playing time out of a reed, they've done great. That's a long-lived reed. I love the look on your faces. Most high school students think if they've played a reed for about 3 months, it's time to maybe start considering making an order. When reeds get old, they get hard to play. They get really sharp. You lose your low register. Then you switch to a new reed and it's going to feel really flat and really open, and you're going to sound like a whole new player, like a beginner again. So that consistency in reed making is great to get used to. My private students that do not make their own reed yet are required to buy 3 new reeds every month. They're going to love one of them. They're going to like one of them. The third one, they're never going to use. That's just the way it is. I was going to show you guys this. I started these reeds last week. I was away at a high school festival in Oklahoma, and this case was full. And I told my students, it is my hope that 3 of these will work great. 4 out of 10. And that's someone that's been making oboe reeds for 40 years, right? So not every reed works great. So there's going to be one they don't like. If they buy just one, what if it's that one? I've had parents say, told parents we really need new reeds, and they've said, well, Christmas is coming, or we have to wait for a birthday. No, it has to be on a regular basis. These days, reeds are between $25 and $30 a piece, so it's a big investment. So I would just call the parents of the students that are interested in playing oboe and let them know that information. Students, I always like to say, you're overly mature, overly smart, confident students, those are the ones to put on the oboe. The ones running around the room banging their heads against the wall, probably not. The reed is so fine that the very tip of the reed, 0.07 hundredths of a millimeter. To let you know how thin that is, a sheet of notebook paper is 12 hundredths of a millimeter. So this is thinner than paper. So if you have a kid that's kind of klutzy all the time and stuff, you're going to go through a lot of reeds. Then here's a funny one. If you have a student that plays French horn really great and they have a sibling coming along, throw them on the oboe. Seems like 80% of my students who have a sibling that plays an instrument, it's French horn. Something, I don't know. So that's an interesting tip. And then double jointed fingers are terrible for the oboe. One of my favorite teachers, Grover Schultz, played English horn in the Chicago Symphony, and he told me he never accepted a student at the college level with double jointed fingers. And I thought that was really harsh. But after this many years of teaching, he's absolutely right. A lot of people have double jointed thumbs where it goes out this way, and they have to hold it way back here, and then their fingers do this or this, and they can't get even, they can't get smooth, they can't get fast. Double jointed, these joints, it just really doesn't work. And I don't think it would work great on any. Ha! Someone just wrote that you used to teach a pair of twins, one on French horn and one on oboe. Exactly. So double jointed fingers, probably not the best idea. Okay, any questions on all of that? Nope.
I have a daughter who plays oboe, and I agree with what you just said about all that. I mean, I've got 5 kids, and she's the kind of kid that could handle the read, and the preparation it takes to even just get it out of the case and put it together properly. And the other thing that I also think is amazing is how many beginners get stuck on pretty bad reads and struggle for months until they finally get a lesson teacher, and then they realize how easy it is. Or in some cases, they never get a good read made by an oboe teacher, and then they struggle and quit. And it's sad, but I'm lucky enough that my mom plays oboe. She's always made the reads for my daughter.
Wow.
And it was amazing. At the very first lesson, my mom had this great read made out for her first lesson. And she sounded like she'd been playing for 2 years on the first lesson, because the read was made for her to sound awesome on the first lesson. So, I mean, anything you guys can do to get a great read in a beginner's hand is also huge, I think. So that's a struggle for us as band directors, though. These kids come in and they just, who knows where they got these things.
You're absolutely right. And a lot of times when band directors take classes with me or study with me for a brief amount of time, they want me to teach them how to make reads or how to fix reads. And honestly, I don't think that's your job. Making and fixing reads is hard. I spend 1 to 2 hours every day of my life making reads, and that's normal. I'm a rare teacher in that I don't sell reads to my students. And here's why. About, 20, 25 years ago, all the oboes in the All-State Honors Orchestra were students of mine. And I was like, oh my gosh, I am the best teacher in the state of Illinois, And then it dawned on me that not one of my students could make a read. And there I was a bad teacher, because I don't think a student can properly assess if they want to go further than high school on the oboe until they've had the opportunity to make some reads. It turns a lot of people off of the instrument. And so I told all my students that by the end of that summer, they were cut off. I wasn't going to make their reads anymore. And guess what? They could all do it. So I've discovered if I sell reads to my students, they don't want to make reads. They've got great reads. There's no incentive. If they're buying store-bought reads, they're struggling with their reads, and they almost beg me to start making reads. There are lots of good sources out there. General band stores are not those sources. The reeds are frequently European scrape. In America, we scrape, I don't know if you can see this, probably not. We scrape the whole reed all the way down to here. And I believe in that packet, there's a drawing of a reed. That's what you want it to look like. In Europe, they only scrape the very tip of the reed in a U shape. You'll find those in American stores all over the place. If you find reeds with wire on them, terrible. Don't do it. That's not what they should have. Most store-bought reeds that I have found are easily a half a step flat. I don't know if they assume kids are going to bite and they make them to compensate for that, but what that does is make students have to bite, right? So there's lots of good sources out there of reeds made by professional oboe players. I recommend having like a list of those if you don't have private teachers, because not every student likes every brand of reeds. A lot of my students are really enjoying reeds by a company called Oboe Duck right now. Some of my students don't like them, and they like one called Sunshine Reeds. I just got back from 2 weeks in a festival in Oklahoma, and the kids were all playing on brands of reeds I've never heard of here, right? So just telling every kid, order reeds until you find that company you like, and then stick with it. Okay? Good. Plastic reeds. No. I wish, but they are awful. They are terrible sounding and just as easily broken as wood reeds, and generally more expensive. And I think kids should start from the very beginning with a realistic feeling reed in their mouth, and a plastic reed, unfortunately, is not a realistic reed. All right. Starting students that want to play the oboe on the clarinet first. I know a lot of school districts enforce this. I don't understand it on many, many, many levels. First of all, if a 5th grader really wants to play the oboe and you say, great, you have to wait till 7th grade, now you have a 5th grader that's just going to sit and spin their wheels for 2 years. Now 7th grade, all the kids are starting to sound good, and you put this student on the hard instrument as a beginner. They're going to sound terrible. Now you've reinforced neurotic behavior that a lot of oboe students tend to have, right? But more than that, the only similarity between the clarinet and the oboe is that they're both black and have silver keys. There is zero relation between the two instruments other than that. Everything about clarinet is teeth and jaw, and you make an embouchure and it does not move. The instrument's held very close to the body. There's nothing that is the same. And in fact, when I teach double reed tech live, hands down, the students that struggle the hardest are my clarinet players. Trombone players nail the oboe. I would almost say if you want to make them wait 2 years, put them on the trombone first. I think it's the small, fast-focused column of air that you use on trombone, we also use on oboe. French horn's another good. The French horn players always do oboe well. Flute players, not so much. The air is very different. Of course, there's woodwind doublers that play Broadway shows and can do all of the instruments, but hands down, without lying, clarinet players struggle the most in my class. So I'd say a big no to that personally. Okay, any questions on that? I know that's a big one and usually a sense of argument and discussion amongst band directors, but no? Okay. Reeds, we talked about a bit. Oboe reeds have to be soaked. They should be soaked for 5 minutes before you play them. Usually we use film canisters, whatever you have. Just put it in gently. Don't, drop it from a long distance, and leave it in there 5 minutes. If you don't have a full 5 minutes, warm water is faster, but I know most schools, churches, concert halls, warm water is like non-existent. Students should never soak their reeds in their mouth for a couple reasons. One, the inside of your mouth is hot. Heat creates a bigger opening on the reed. The bigger the opening, the flatter the reed will play. Unless that student literally fills that reed with spit, only the outside of the reed is going to soak. So you're going to have an unevenly soaked reed. It's not going to vibrate properly. It also cuts down on the longevity of the reed. When you soak it in water, those fibers of the cane fill with water. When you soak it in your mouth, it gets filled with the acids and things inside your mouth, and it breaks down the cane faster. So you don't want to soak it in your mouth. I know band directors, your time is at a premium. And you're like, I don't have time for my oboes to soak the reeds for 5 minutes. If you get your kids in the habit of first thing they do when they sit down, put that reed in water, tune your brass, then tune your winds. By the time you do all the brass, your oboes reeds are going to be ready, and you will be happier, and your oboe players will be happier. After they're done playing on them, you don't have to like rub it on a cloth or anything, dry it out. Just let it suck all the water out of it, wipe it off, put it in a substantial reed case. The tubes and stuff that they frequently come in, students break the tips of the reeds on those all the time. So a good substantial reed case that holds them like this is ideal. And that's it on my thoughts on oboe for you guys. Anything?
I really like what you said about soaking the reed, and this is another reason why I'm a big believer in letting kids have a little bit of individual warm-up time before you actually get into the class. And I know that you're trying to teach bell to bell and you're trying to fit in so much stuff, but not only for the oboe, but brass players can be checking / greasing up their slides, or percussionists setting things up, whatever have you. But I really like giving all the players that little bit of extra time to warm up, because for this situation here, there's a very specific need, and sometimes we rush these kids into playing and it's not what's best for them. So that's really cool.
Yeah, thanks. And so I can show you this. Here's a reed. If I just do that, I have not soaked it. That's what an unsoaked up reed sounds like. I assume you can hear that over Zoom. It's hard as heck for me to play. It's bright, it's reedy, it's sharp, it's awful. And it's usually loud. And it's going to destroy that reed, maybe even crack it, because it's just too dry to be vibrating like that. All righty. I assume you all know how to put the oboe together. The one important thing when students are putting the oboe together is this right here. So as the oboe is facing away from me, it's the right hand side. This should be lined up perfectly. The left hand side doesn't matter so much as the right hand side. The right hand side is the one that's attached to this right here. That's the balance between the top joint and the bottom joint. So if that's off, the two joints won't work well together. Frequently on student oboes, they bend this side. So that's why we don't worry about it, just the one side. Okay. The oboe has to be put all the way together. Most people don't know this, but the oboe is the only instrument where there is no place to push or pull if we are out of tune. A lot of people think if you separate here a little bit, it'll help. I don't find that to help the pitch at all. I see Brian agrees, and it's going to mess up this adjustment, and the top and the bottom won't work. If you do not put the reed all the way into the bottom of the well, the oboe doesn't work. It might fix whatever tuning note you're using, whether you use A or B flat in your band, but you're going to lose your low notes. The top of the staff's going to get really wonky. The reed has to be all the way in. So I tell my students all the time, if your band director says you're sharp, you need to pull out, smile, wiggle your head, do this, just relax and blow more. Right? So, sorry, there's nothing we can do. Or say, try a different reed, but it has to be all the way together always. Swabbing is very important when we're done playing. Even with the plastic oboe, it's very important. I can't tell you without making you ill the stuff I have cleaned out of student oboes with students that swear they do not need to swab. But trusted to say, sometimes if I think about it, I cannot eat chocolate pudding. Most swabs go through the bell of the oboe. And I don't understand this, because if I get a knot in my swab, here it is, stuck way up here inside the top of my oboe. And now I have to go to the oboe repair shop. Unless you're wise enough to buy a swab extractor, which costs, I don't know, around $20. They are really hard to get out, even with a swab extractor. I like this particular brand of swabs called GEM, G-E-M. They have the longest string of any swab. And you can put it in the top, do this. Oops, if it doesn't get caught on your active key. Pull it through. It's the only one with the string long enough to do that. Now, if I have a knot, it's right here, back it out. And swabs knot themselves morning, noon, and night. I don't know how they do it, but they do. I don't know any other oboe player except for me and my students that swab from the top. I don't understand why everybody doesn't. It's actually less noisy. It's less, if I have to swab in the middle of the concert, it's less of this. And after having gotten my swab stuck in my oboe, after giving the A before an opera performance in college, and the opera starting 20 minutes late while the conductor helped me get it out, I have no interest in living through that again. If you get the gem swabs, they do come with like a Teflon coating on the weight. And for some reason, it won't go through the oboe with the Teflon coating on it. You can just easily cut it off. All righty. There you go. Okay. Posture and embouchure. Oh, Brian, did you have a question?
It was totally unrelated to where you were headed.
That's
but
okay.
Maybe at some point later you could talk about, because I always get myself confused with extra fingerings on like a more advanced oboe, like the third F.
Mm-hmm.
I need a refresher.
Okay, sure. We'll hit that. Absolutely. I am very rare, in fact, maybe even the only one that thinks body is more important than embouchure. And when I tell other oboe players, they look at me like I'm really stupid. But then they hear me through and they get it. So if you look at this entire class, every single one of us has a completely different shaped mouth, right? All of us, different shaped chin. It's all different, right? When I went to grad school at Northwestern University, Ray Still was my teacher. Ray Still played principal oboe in the Chicago Symphony for 40-something years. I see Alex smiling. And at the time was considered one of the greatest musicians on earth. Not even just greatest oboes, greatest musicians, right? And every lesson he would say to me, you have the most perfect oboe mouth I've ever seen. And I would look at his and it couldn't look more different. He's a big 6'4" guy with a much bigger face than me, right? And then my very next teacher was Grover Schiltz, who literally sat right next to him in the Chicago Symphony all those years. And every lesson, Grover would say, I hate your embouchure. Your chin's all wrong. You've taken too much lower lip. And I'd like wake up in the middle of the night crying, thinking, I can't do this. What do I take away from that, right? When I was young and just playing the oboe, all we had was record albums. And so all I could see is on the cover of them holding their oboe, right? So flash forward a couple years and I start teaching. And I hate to say but I notice all my Asian students look like they're filling their upper lip with air. They tell me they're not, but it looks like it, always. Violinist in my quartet's from Taiwan. For whatever reason, when he's playing, he frequently goes, and he looks like he's filling his upper lip with air. He tells me he's not, and in fact, he's let me poke it. He is not. So now I know that's the makeup of the Asian upper lip. It's never going to look like mine, right? So then flash forward a couple more years to YouTube. Now we can watch all the big guys play and we can watch it with the camera right on their faces. And I start noticing that all the German guys, chin and lower lip look just like mine. Guess what? My dad was born and raised in Austria. I have a German chin. Nothing I can do about it. I think I sound like an American oboe player. 37 years of gigs tell me I sound like an American oboe player. It's just that I can't do this little shelf thing here that you're supposed to do in the American School of Oboe Playing and still make a seal with my upper lip around the reed. So there's certain things we cannot do with our mouths. We can't smile big or make the inside of the mouth huge, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But everybody's going to look slightly different than everybody else. The other reason I think body is more important than embouchure is, I'd say about 10, 15 years ago, people started dropping like flies because of all the pain in their body when they played. Backstage at an orchestra concert is packed with ibuprofen. I am 56 years old. I have 0 ounces of pain anywhere when I play, and I never get tired when I play. To me, that's a big deal. To me, that's important. I know a ton of people that have had to quit playing because they hurt their body. I know 0 people that have had to quit playing because they hurt their mouth. Right there tells me the answer is body's more important. So here's the part where I thought you all would have oboes in your hands, and hopefully I can translate this without them. If I hold, I'm going to put this down a little bit. If I hold the oboe very close to my body like this, so like if I had started on clarinet, couple bad things happen. One, I feel the weight of the oboe right here. This is how we get a little thing called carpal tunnel. We don't want it. It's a major killer of oboe players, and it will make you have to have surgery. Also, I feel myself squeezing very hard right here to balance the oboe. More carpal tunnel going through here. Look how far my finger has to stretch here and how tense my hand looks here to reach the bottom keys on both sides. Welcome tendonitis. Another killer of oboe players, right? Also, notice where the reed is in the mouth and the angle of the reed in the mouth. Everything about good oboe playing is a fast, focused column of air going through the oboe. If the reed is pointing at the roof of my mouth like this, the air has to hit the roof of my mouth, bank down, and go through the reed. I've lost airspeed. I've lost tone. I'm going to play sharp. I'm going to play bright. I'm going to sound like this. I'm not getting any gigs if I sound like that, right? So if I slowly start to then, or maybe I can just scooch back, raise the bell of the oboe up a little bit. First thing you see is watch, I'll come closer. Watch how my shoulders start to drop. Shoulder pain, a major killer of oboe players. The next thing you notice, watch how my elbows start to come out naturally as the shoulders drop. Then notice how my hands start to relax. Instead of pointing at the ceiling with the knuckles, they start to go down, right? Suddenly this finger doesn't have to be like that. When I get high enough, suddenly I feel the reed resting on my lower lip instead of pushing against my upper lip. Everything about oboe embouchure and oboe playing is a fat cushion right here for the reed to vibrate in. If the reed is resting up here, the reed's basically vibrating against teeth. Not a pretty sound. People also forget this is the hinge jaw. This is not. You cannot move this jaw. Unlike clarinet, the oboe, when we play it, our jaw is constantly in motion. I call it speaking the notes. I can move my jaw I want if the reed's here, and I'm not going to change the tone. I'm not going to change the character. I'm not going to change the color. So the reed always has to ride with the lower lip. Okay? So I keep bringing it up, 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 up. And then I notice this super cool thing happens when I get right about here. And that is, suddenly I'm not squeezing here anymore at all. The oboe feels far less heavy because this finger is suddenly pushing down. Tendons, tendonitis, gravity. I always tell my students, gravity is free. Use it, right? Also, half the notes on the oboe, this finger is down. On the entire range of the oboe, there is only one note, high C sharp, where this finger is up. To me, that makes much more sense to use that as the balance finger than that as the balance finger, right? So if your students are playing and you see their oboe wobbling when they're doing left-hand notes, their bell is too low, right? Also, pushing down with this finger to balance the oboe reinforces that reed in the lower lip. All right? Yes, ma'am. Angela.
Can you repeat that last thing that you said about like your thumb and balancing? I can't type that fast.
Oh, sure. So if we use the right hand, first finger, to balance the oboe, which is what happens when the oboe bell is too low, we're squeezing hard in here, and we're using tendons and muscles to balance the oboe. If it's too low, half the notes on the oboe do not include this finger. There's nothing to balance. It'll wobble when you do just left-hand notes. This finger is balance, is just Gravity, right? High C sharp is the only note where that finger is up. Otherwise, gravity, pushing down. Makes the elbow. If you see students doing this a lot, and by the way, in my lessons, the minute a student does this or says they're tired or says they hurt somewhere, we stop immediately and figure it out. Anywhere you feel pain on any instrument you are playing, you are doing something wrong. If I play, now all I'm going to change, and I hope you can hear this over Zoom, is I'm going to tense my shoulders. Hear the difference in the tone? Sharper, brighter, thinner, right? It's amazing. That's all it takes. I always say the oboe senses fear. It does. If you're scared and nervous and you squeeze it and you're afraid a note's going to squawk or afraid a note's going to be out of tune, that's exactly what it's going to do, right? So to me, this makes more sense than this for balancing the oboe. All right. Also, when it's coming up and all of a sudden you feel it switch from this finger to this finger, you'll notice that the weight shifts from here to here. Your wrist and this part of your hand are not meant to hold weight. Your bicep is meant to hold weight all day long. My oboe is a slightly heavier wood oboe than a lot of oboes. It's got extra keys and stuff than a student oboe. It weighs 2 pounds, 2 ounces. 2 pounds of an oboe is not going to hurt your bicep. It is going to hurt your wrist. All right, so up here, that angle will be different for every student. A good way to gauge it is the dangly thing at the back of your throat. We always call it the uvula. Point that reed right at it. Also, when your bell's too low, your tongue tends to hit the reed right here. You're going to lose diction, and your tongue's going to have to curl back in order to reach that tip of the reed. You're going to lose speed. When it's at a good angle like this, it's pointed right like this. The goal is to tongue at the bottom of the reed, not like this, right? But brush the bottom of the reed. So that puts it pointed right there. Okay? Any questions on that? No? Everybody thinks this finger and this finger are where we get hand position on the oboe. Tell you right now, you can have the worst hand position ever and reach these two keys. These are the keys that are hard to reach. You'll see students frequently, their elbows go out when they use the pinky keys. You shouldn't have to move your arms at all. So what I have my students do, finger on the C sharp key, finger on whatever key they have over here, reed in the mouth, let the fingers fall where they will. And that almost always gives perfect hand position. When people start from here, they always end up like this. So fingers relax, knuckles point more towards the wall than towards the ceiling. Okay, good. Finger motion is as tiny as possible. So I always tell my students, no flying fingers, right? Smaller the motion. Oboe is a very lumpy instrument. It's very hard to not get notes between notes. So the smaller the fingers move, the cleaner they will be. All righty? So now you're thinking, that's great. What do we do with their mouths? After 4 colleges and 6 years in college, I studied with Grover Schiltz. And he was the first person that ever discussed the inside shape of the mouth with me. And it was life-changing. And I think it's super interesting. So everybody say E. When you say E, you feel your corners pull back really tight, right? E. This is horrible for the oboe. E. Feel how it pulls through here? E. Anywhere you feel pulling, you will get tired. E. Think about your tongue. It's kind of hard and scooped like this, right? E. It's hard to move your tongue fast when it's really stiff, right? E. Teeth are almost together without actually biting, right? E. Think about your throat. I always say it feels like you've swallowed a coat hanger, right? It's like E. It's tight and tense this way. So if I say E into the oboe, here's what I get. Sharp, bright, awful. Now say O. O. Feel that pulling there? You're going to get tired really fast. O. Teeth are really far apart. The more airspace we have on the oboe, the flatter we go. Most young players play the oboe incredibly sharp, In fact, the oboe is a very flat instrument. If you listen to professional recordings, if the oboe player is ever out of tune, 9.5 out of 10 times it's that they are flat. Young players tend to bite to compensate for that because they don't push air. O creates flatness because that air gets in that big cavity inside the mouth, swirls around, you lose airspeed going through the instrument. Same thing when we make oboe reeds. The wider the reed, the darker the sound. The wider the reed, the more air it can hold, and the flatter we go. So we have to find that balance between wide to get the sound we want, but narrow to get the pitch we need. And I'm going to go back to that in a minute. Okay. Oh, think about your tongue. Oh, it's kind of pointing at the bottom of the back of your lower teeth, right? I tell my students, very hard to articulate when your tongue's down here, right? Oh, think about your throat. Oh, sounds like, I always say, it feels like you swallowed a can of corn, right? It's really hard and really round. So if I say oh into the oboe, E, all I change in those two is the shape of the inside of my mouth. And I've got about a half a step difference in pitch. All right. Now everybody say ooh. I always say to my students, nothing bad ever comes after ooh, right? Ooh, ice cream, right? Ooh, corners are down and relaxed. Just like they are if I look at all of you when you're just sitting there, kind of just down and relaxed slightly, right? Ooh, cool thing about it, E, O, ooh, slight overbite. So I'm going to go back to that wide reed. When we make our reeds, we actually overlap the blades slightly. So I don't think you could see it if I hold my reed up. Probably not. Now you can actually see both blades of the reed because they're not like this, they're like this, which reduces the airspace inside and helps keep the pitch up. Same thing here, ooh, release or makes the inside airspace of the mouth smaller without actually having to bite. Ooh, think about where your tongue is. It's aiming right at the reed, right? Ooh, think of your throat, relaxed. So if I say ooh into the oboe, E, O, ooh. All I changed is the shape of the inside of my mouth. All right, any questions on that? Nope. All right, how much reed we then put in our mouth is very important. We want to put as absolute little reed into our mouth as possible. Ray still used to make us start things all the time with no reed in our mouth and then roll it in. So we go like, and of course what he did was teach a bunch of people to scoop into notes, which is not pleasant. But his point was just as much reed as you need and then you're done, right? If you have too much reed in your mouth, there's two telltale notes of that, and that is C and G. So if I put too much reed in my mouth, I'm going to play C major scale. Hear that slappy G and that slappy C. If I put less reed in my mouth, that's all I change. So if your students have C's and G's screaming at you, tell them to put less reed in their mouth. Okay, so what I do. Oh, and I forgot this part. This is important. As band directors, we all know to tell our students to sit up and both feet on the floor, right? And that's because both feet on the floor plus our seat makes a triangle, which is the most stable base we can have, unless we're on our hands and knees. And it's very hard to play the oboe when you're on your hands and knees, right? If it's if it's easy for me to push you over, you are wasting energy here in your gut sitting up. For instance, if you cross your legs, suddenly you're a little tipsy, right? But what happens with most players is when you tell them to sit up, they sit up. And this gets very tight and tense. And frequently the shoulders go up, frequently the chin goes up, right? So instead, I tell my students to imagine they have one hair in the crown of their head and that they're dangling down from that. It's a very different feel than thinking of sitting up, right? So I tell my students, dangle down into the chair. This helps keep the shoulders relaxed rather than thinking of sitting up, right? And then, this is going to sound funny, but sitting up from the ears. A lot of people, when you tell them sit up straight, they go from the chin or the nose, and that creates tension in the throat. Also tends to make the reed go back to that upper lip and point at the roof of the mouth. So I always tell my students, dangle down into the chair. I do a lot of, I don't think I'll upset anybody here, I do a lot of what I call dumb blonde teaching. It's frequently, I think the simplest things are the smartest. And the first dumb blonde lesson I give my students is brain, no brain. It doesn't feel like that. And you'll watch students put the elbow where they think it should go, and then they go to it. So I tell my students, dangle down into the chair, bring that elbow to you. And that almost always gives this perfect angle we're looking at, right? I have found 0 good recordings anywhere on YouTube where the elbow has the elbow down here. Always a nice big angle. Sometimes you even see up like this, right? Reed always stays on the lower lip. So I tell my students, put the lower lip on top of the teeth, not in the mouth, on top of the teeth. The tip of the reed on top of the teeth, not in the mouth. And then we create the embouchure around that. Okay, any questions on that? All right, breathing and blowing. Air management is one of the hardest things on the oboe. The reason being, we have to have a full body of air, like you do on all other instruments, to support the tone. And that goes very fast through the oboe. But in reality, we have a spot thinner than a dime to blow that air through. So we are actually, well, let me go back a step. If you go back to science class, you remember when air gets hot, it expands, right? It says it's 90 or 73 degrees in here right now. If I'm having a good day, 98.6 in here. So when I bring air in here, it's going to heat up, and it's going to heat up rapidly. We actually are expelling air when we play the oboe slower than it's expanding inside of our body. So the oboe is the only instrument that does this, but we have to exhale, then inhale every time we breathe. So we always exhale, then inhale. We can do that as fast as anybody else can just inhale. Sometimes if I have a thing with a lot of little rests, I'll just exhale in a couple of them, and then I'll inhale on the next one. But we always have to get rid of that air. So we dangle down in the chair, bring the elbow to us, center it on that lower lip. Think of leading with the pinkies, right? All that. Feel this pushing, not this squeezing, to get the balance right. Then I love this. Ray still always said this. Exhale, inhale, and sigh into the elbow. So you just... Okay. Any questions on that? All righty. And breaths, this is another interesting fact that's good for all your students. Everybody breathe in through your nose. Where's the air go? No place satisfying at all, right? Right to here. Make your mouth small, like you have an oboe reed in it, and breathe. Where's the air go? Not much further. Almost feel like it goes to the middle of your back, right? Now a big mouth like you're yawning. That's how we fill the abdomen, right? So I always tell my students there's nothing pretty about playing the oboe. It's got to be a big old... So Ray still would say a big old yawning breath and then sigh into the oboe. And I love that thought. All righty. Anything there? No. Articulations. I could nerd out on talking tonguing all day long. I think that tonguing on the oboe is so interesting. We have such a wide range of articulations we can use. All of them, unless we're doing really strong accents, do not involve the air. Air is constant on the oboe. So I always tell my students, tongue with your tongue, not with your air. If I try and do a puff of air for every short note I play, it's going to grate me, slow me down, and it's just going to sound terrible, right? So a lot of times I have my students practice an articulated phrase, slurred, and think about what their air does. Think about the shape of the phrase, then add the tongue and don't let it affect the other two things. We usually tongue on the top of the tip of the tongue, which my students love saying. And almost always, if you say what you want to play, like if I don't play tha, 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 that's very, like the tongue almost scrapes the teeth and it's more air than tongue, I'm going to get a very legato tongue. If I say ta, 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 I'm going to get a very short top of the tip of the tongue kind of thing, right? We almost never end a note with our tongue on the oboe for two reasons. One, it sounds bad. And two, it means 2 tongue strokes for every note. That slows down how fast you can go. So we actually start the tongue or the note with our tongue and we end it with our jaw. So almost like saying tom, tom, tom. So what I'll do is I'll have my students start, just play a long note, and everybody say mom, mom, mom. Feel how the air doesn't stop between moms? We do that in the oboe. And when they can do that, then I get them to do it faster. So I'm still using no tongue, just my jaw. Right? And then when they can do that good, then we add to the tongue to the beginning of it. So it goes from mom, mom, mom to tom, tom, tom. That's how you get nice round tongue notes on the oboe. And if you look closely at YouTube videos, you'll see we speak the notes all the time. Okay, any questions on that? Nope. Okay. Couple fingering things. The half hole I find to be the hardest things for students to get used to. Going over the bridge. You guys kind of know your oboe fingerings, okay, to know what I'm talking about in half hole? Yeah, okay. Usually what happens is students worry about getting all these fingers down and then they worry about the half hole. And I need to come up with a name for it, but end up with a half a Lodi, half a Heidi, right? And students don't even hear that little bit of low D. They just think that's what D sounds like. A couple of years ago, I was watching, it was actually at Vandercook, I was watching a student play something and couldn't coordinate this. And all of a sudden I thought, you know what? Getting the low note, then the high note. She's leading with these fingers. Lead with the half hole. And I find when my students think of leading with the half hole, it opens just as these go down. And it makes these go down together. And they get a really, really good half hole motion. So I want to show you something. I don't know if I can get close enough for you to see it. Let me see. When I play low D and then open the half hole, look at how little it has to open to make it go up. Can you see that? It barely opened, right? You don't have to go, and you don't have to go. It should never be a sliding motion. It should be the tiniest rolling motion you can get. So I have my students play low D and then watch their half hole finger and slowly roll it until it goes up. And you're only really uncovering that much. If students slide, then they end up having to pick it up to go back. And then they have that moment with no key down and it sounds bad and it's slower. So very small half hole motion. The F question. Forked F is the F fingering most students learn first. Forked F is the F fingering professional oboe players have to be drug kicking, screaming, and crying to use. We try to never use it. Even on the best oboes, it's weak and flat and fuzzy. On English horn, it's phenomenal. I use forked F on English horn all the time, but on oboe, it's awful. On most student oboes and most fingering charts, you'll see that they add the E flat key to the forked F. The reason it says that is on my oboe, I have this key right here behind my E flat key. It's called the F resonance key. It is only open if I'm playing forked F. The minute I lift this finger or put down this finger, it closes. So by adding the E flat key, you open this, which is relatively close to that, and makes a fake F resonance key. If you have an oboe with a fake F resonance key and you add the E flat key, it makes the F sound really horrible. But adding the E flat key, of course, makes a lot of more fingering issues, right? So regular F would be the one I would try and get most students to use. Better student oboes and professional oboes will have this key here, which is the left F key. It puts down your regular F key for you. So if I have to play like D, F, E, that's the go too. Even with 3 choices, I still have to be good at sliding. And I frequently have to slide from the D key to the F key. Student oboes confuse me greatly. The key position is much further apart than it is on a professional oboe. I don't understand why for 5th grade hands, the key spacing is further. There's usually on a student oboe so much space between these 2 keys that I can put my finger between them. And on high notes, we have to put them both down together. So it makes no sense. My F key is shaped such that it scoops towards from the D key up so I can slide easily. Student oboes, it's frequently bigger and higher, so sliding is a problem. But that's what we have to be able to do. Does that answer your F questions? Good. The other one that's really handy that most students don't use is we all know E flat down here, but we also have a left E flat, and it's this kind of round one in the middle by the left hand. I'm rare in that I use it probably just as much as the right E flat. Most people consider it an alternate fingering. I use it a lot. My students use it a lot. The thing you have to watch is frequently when they go for it, they let these fingers bend and then air escapes out back there. So they have to be careful that these fingers are centered in the keys, and bringing the bell up more will help keep them from having to do that. And then another really handy key is we have A flat or G sharp here. This is also one. I use this at least as much as that. I've had 8 students go to Eastman, and Richard Kilmer's the teacher there, and he's always like, oh, you study with Deb, there's all those right A flats. I don't understand why people don't use them more. It leaves these fingers open for all these keys, and just for my hand, it's comfortable. But it's another good one to get students used to. Upper level student oboes and professional oboes are different than any other wind instrument in that it's set up so that we never have to move more than 1 finger to trill between 2 notes, which is very handy. Flutes, they have to play trills C to D, and I watch them doing this. We just go, right? There is a trill key for every note, so we never have to move more than 1 finger to trill between 2 notes. If you Google oboe trill fingerings, you'll find it all right there. All righty. Octave keys. Half hole is just C sharp, D, E flat. A lot of people will try to put the back octave on the half hole. It makes them way too sharp, and once you open the half hole, it's already sharp as it is. Then we move up to E, F, F sharp, G, and A flat, back octave. Higher than A flat, side octave. Now, I don't know if you can see this. When I have the back octave key down, this lower one is open. When I put down the side octave key, it opens the top one, but it also closes the bottom one. You don't have to have your back octave key on when you do the side octave key, but it's okay if it leaves it on. So if I was going to go from G to A, I'd just leave it on. Right? If I was going to go from D to A, I wouldn't bother to put it on. It cancels it out. Better student oboes, professional oboes have this one. It's the 3rd octave key. I've never used it in my life. Students will try and put it on high notes and it makes them sound bad. I think you have to play like ridiculous, high contemporary, weird things to use it. I never ever use it. So there's that. Okay. Anything else? Anybody? It goes by so fast. Hope I haven't bored you to death. Anybody have any questions on anything I didn't hit? Or any comments on anything I said?
My comment is that I just love your passion about doing this stuff the right way. It's really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, anybody have any other questions? I think that handout is actually very helpful, and it's always nice to have another fingering chart in our arsenal. I feel like some fingering charts just don't work well for some kids. But I particularly really like some of the things you were talking about with the body, for instance, or the embouchure, tonguing. We've had a lot of great presentations, and the things you've said really have a lot in common with what the other instructors say. And unfortunately, when you go through band methods and rehearsal methods, we tend to generalize a lot of things, and things like vowel shape inside your mouth, or even the vowels we ask students to speak as a full ensemble sometimes are detrimental to what you're trying to do as a musician on the instrument. So this is just really great because it's like thinking about, okay, what vowel do I want all my clarinets to say? My oboes are going to say ooh now instead of e or ah. So like little things like that. I don't know. I pick up on these things, and I keep them in my back pocket because I just never want to be the band director who is telling students things. And then, like you said, hey, if your band director tells you to pull out your reed, don't.
Right, right.
So yeah, we really appreciate it. But anybody else have any comments or any questions?
And I did want to point out two things in that list of stuff I gave you guys. I don't know how I can see it, but the first page is a scan of that poster behind me. It's all the adjusting screws on the oboe. Oboes go out of whack really, really easily. I couldn't believe when I got to Oklahoma 2 weeks ago, the 4 oboe players there all had really good oboes, either of their own or of their schools. None of them were in playing condition. And it used to be when my students' oboes weren't working right, I just grabbed them and fixed them. Now in the past year with Zoom lessons, I couldn't do that. Gave my students that chart, worked them through it. Now all my students can adjust their own oboes. I even took on 2 8th grade students this year. I don't usually teach the younger ones. Even they can adjust their oboes. It's really easy. And just real quick, the screws on the posts, these round ones, are what hold the oboe together. Those should be all the way tight always. These ones that are more in the sleeves and they're black, they're adjusting screws. They should never be all the way tight. Clockwise, and every finger key that you use with your finger is attached to a small key we don't use with our finger. Principal keys, vent keys. Turning the clock or the screw clockwise tightens the vent key, counterclockwise tightens the principal key. The balance has to be right. That chart numbers them all and says, so if this one is loose, here's how you do it, right? There are oboe players whose screwdrivers I see every time I play with them. There are oboe players whose screwdrivers I never see. I try to be that kind of person. I think the more you fiddle with the screws, the more you fiddle with the screws, right? The minute my students can't do something or I can't do something, or the minute something's weirdly out of tune, that's when I'm going to check adjustments. If I've played in a really, really cold cathedral, or we've had a massive weird weather change, or I just flew with my oboes this past week, I check my adjustments after that. But as a general rule, I trust they're okay until I can't do anything. And then the other thing I wanted to show you guys, just some of my favorite books. For beginning oboe, I don't think you can beat the Geckler method. It's just really, really good. And if I don't teach young kids, but when I teach double reed tech, this is the book we use. When I did used to teach the beginners, there's a book called Tunes for Technique, and then there's a book called Oboe Solos with the blue cover. You'll know it's the right one because there's a girl playing the oboe on the cover, but I always cross that picture out because she's got horrible body position. And so I don't want my students to look and imitate her. But that's what I would do if I was doing beginners. Concert and Contest Collection is the greatest oboe solo book. Everything written by Bach, Handel, Mozart, like the big guys. It's got lots of time periods. I'm big in being historically accurate with my students as far as performance practice for different time periods of music. I can hit that all in this book. Frequently, if I'm going to go just play a church job or something, I grab this and bring it with me just in case somebody says, hey, can you add an extra piece here? It's that good. You have to buy the piano book separately. And be careful on, no, it's this book on Amazon. Somebody's got it out there, but half of the inside is percussion music. After that, we moved to this, the Barrett oboe method. I call this kind of the Bible of the oboe. It's really great. It's got articulation studies. It's got a neat thing about the history of the oboe, but it's got 48 etudes. And what I like about them is they hit everything that's hard about the oboe, but in a way that's fun to play and good. But they're all written in duet form. So my students learn them as an etude, and then we turn around and learn them as a duet together. I'm big into playing duets with my students. And then this book, in most states, the Fairling, is what they use for district and all state auditions. Solos, 98% of my students are not going to go on to be professional oboe players. So I want them to have a lot of fun when they have the oboe in their hand. I make them research pieces. Tell me what piece you want to learn next. If it's appropriate, we do it, or I'll give them a list of like 3 or 4 to choose from. So we're going to hit all the biggies, but for the most part, I want them to play what speaks to them, because that's when they're going to have the most fun. That's when they're going to practice it. That's when they're going to want to perform it. Now, of course, my ones that look like they might want to be oboe majors, then we have a definite list of things we must do. But most people do it for fun, so I want them to have fun and still be challenged. All righty. Any other questions?
No, thanks for this. And I know the oboe is a scary thing for most people, but thanks for making these all such practical ideas. I mean, I think we can all do what you said with our oboists, when we see them next. So
well,
very cool.
Here's what I tell my students, and I know I've kept you over, but if it looks like you're working really hard, and if it sounds like you're struggling, there is only one person in the audience that's impressed, and that's your mom. And she's going, that's my baby. She's working so hard. And everybody else in the audience is going, that poor girl is working so hard, right? So make it easy. Air fixes everything. Those are the 2 mantras we have in my teaching studio.
Cool.
Okay.
Well, Deb, thanks for joining us, and everybody. This is our last session together. I'll get all your final assignments here, and thanks for putting all your ideas together from this class. And Deb, thanks for being like our final hitter of the season. It was super fun to see you, and thanks again for your thoughts. And we'll keep in contact here.
You bet. My pleasure. And thanks to you guys for all you do and for taking the time to learn extra more to help the oboe players.
Awesome. All right. Anybody that has any questions, I can stay on for you. If not, have a great afternoon. Thanks again, Deb.
Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Glenn, was there a certain format? I know I've got it in the Google slide presentation.
I was kind of thinking if you were going to do a Google slide, that you could do 1 page. I mean, it kind of depends on how much you zoom in on these slides, obviously. But you could have one or 2 pages per instrument. One way you could do it is the information's on page 1, and then like the application or some of your like big hitter ideas is on page 2, and then you could go on to your next instrument.
Yep. I've got.
Or you could also maybe do 2 columns.
Yeah, I've got it all formatted. Would just saving it as a PDF in there, or just
that the actual Google link is fine with me.
Okay.
If you want to go to PDF, it's cool too.
Sometimes it's weird, and it has to be a file. It won't let you attach. It won't let you submit something without an actual attachment.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I'm not really going to be looking at these all that closely. I mean, obviously, I want to see what you did, but the most important thing is that it looks good and makes sense to you.
Right, for sure.
So it's I was even thinking, some of these are, especially with the Google Slides, you could probably even pull this up with your band or a technique type class when you get back to school and say, hey, here's my thoughts on, learning some oboe refreshers with your 7th or 8th graders who are coming off of all this break time. So
yeah, for sure. No, it's good. Okay, I got it. Got to figure it out.
All right. Well, thank you. Yeah, sorry about my little glitchiness here today, but finally got it figured out here with my phone.
Yeah, we've all
right.
So
are you in the other class?
No, nope.
You're not, okay. I was gonna say I'll see you tonight, but well, I'll see you around. Maybe I'll see another Vandercook class sometime, or I'm sure we'll run into each other at some point. But
Yeah.
you seem like a really with it guy, and
thanks.
seems like you know a lot about your secondaries already, but this has hopefully been helpful.
Yeah, I nerd out about this stuff. This is my kind of deal, is the pedagogy stuff. I love
I
it.
kind of do too. So I think it's because my mom and dad were band directors, and even through like living with them and all the friends I have who are great musicians, it's like you still can never know it all enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's cool.
Awesome.
All right. Well, good luck with your school year. Thanks again for doing this.
Thanks, you too.
Yeah.